Hello, everyone. I'm Mel Hauser. I use she, they pronouns, and I'm the executive director of All Brains Belong. Welcome to Brain Club. Let me share screen and get us oriented to our book chat. Move this actually. There we go. Better. So tonight is a book chat about Anchored by Deb Dana. If you've not been to a Brain Club book chat before, don't worry. No one expects you to have read the book. It's if we plucked out excerpts and themes, and that's really what we'll be talking about today. Hey, Sarah, do you think you could take over letting people in from the waiting room? All right, I just got that most recent batch, but like,
Got it.
okay, awesome. Thank you. All right, so um, before we begin, just to let you know that closed captions are enabled. You just have to toggle them on if you'd like to use it. So depending on your version of Zoom, you might see the live transcript closed captioning icon. If not, look for the more ... and choose show subtitles. You can do the same and choose hide subtitles if you want to turn them off. That's what that looks like. All right, so if you're new to Brain Club, this is our weekly community education program for purposes of demonstrating All Brains Belong's approach to neuro-inclusive culture, so that then you all, if you like some of the practices that you see here today, you can go out into the rest of your life and promote new ways of thinking and being. And that's how we transform culture. It's also about developing broader community awareness about neurodiversity and of the topics and that are importance to the neurodivergent community. While we hope that this is a place where you feel safe from your very first time, and that we hope that you experience this as a supportive place, this is not a support group. It's also not a place for medical or mental health advice or a place to make personal or individualized requests or problem solving. This is an education space where we invite you to listen, to learn, to observe what a neuro-inclusive space looks like, and think about how what you're learning connects to your life. There is no one right way to participate here at Brain Club. You can have your video on or off, even if it's on. We don't expect anything of you. Please feel free to walk or move or fidget or stim or eat or take breaks or anything else that needs doing. We will have time for discussion after some slides, but during discussions, you're welcome to use mouth words or chat or emoticons or however else you like to communicate. And there's no pressure to do any of that. Observation is a completely valid form of participation at all of our programs. And in addition to affirming all aspects of identity, we prioritize the group's needs over that of the individual. This really is about a program where the collective community comes together to learn. It's my visual support to make sure I have the chat open where I can see it. I missed a lot of chat messages. Hello, everybody. Oh, Lizzie's put in the chat. Thanks, Lizzie. Our Brain Club community agreement written by our community advisory board about how we are in space together. All right. If this is your first time at Brain Club, it's okay to not understand what's happening. We just invite you to keep coming back. It might take several times to figure it out, and sometimes it can be helpful just to sit back and observe. And Lizzie's got the frequently asked questions coming up in the chat for details about logistics if you're curious about things. That's the best place to look. All right. So, how our format is going to work tonight. Part one, we've got a classroom style presentation. I've got some slides with some excerpts from this book and some videos, some video clips of the author explaining different parts about the book. And then we're going to have time for a discussion. During the presentation part, the chat will remain open. We just ask that you use it intentionally, slowly, thoughtfully. When the chat goes too fast, I cannot read it. So just as on behalf of me as a facilitator, I think you'll get better responses if you use the chat slowly. Almost thinking about the chat as the equivalent of mouth words participation. So probably like 25, 30 minutes of slides and videos, and then we'll have time for questions. All right. I'm also going to mention that next week starts our new theme. February 2025's theme is about conflicting access needs. What happens when two or more people have access needs? That is what we need for full and meaningful participation. What happens where two or more people have access needs that conflict? That's what we'll be talking about the whole month of February. It's actually like what we talk about at Brain Club every day. So Lizzie's going to drop in the chat the registration link if you'd like to join us next month for Brain Club. All right, so this book. Anchored is written by Deb Dana, who is a clinician, a consultant, and an author, of course, specializing in polyvagal theory. So polyvagal theory was developed by Dr. Stephen Porges, and so Deb Dana collaborates with Dr. Porges. And what polyvagal theory really is, and I think one of our video clips talks about this, but it's the idea of a more nuanced and sophisticated and accurate understanding of the autonomic nervous system. It's the idea that there is a predictable way that the autonomic or automatic part of the nervous system functions. And so that's what this book's about. It's really about it's like a guide to understanding how our nervous system shapes our daily experiences and translates the science of that into everyday life. I had a slide about that. Who knew? So the other thing that's really interesting about this book is that there are a number of experiential prompts and practices to explore your own nervous system and how to have like some exercises or practices about how to like shift different parts of the nervous system, which are very interesting. We're not going to do there's like one I'll show you that is maybe less deep, but we're mostly not going to get into practices so that we can keep this in the education space. It might get too confusing if we're practicing therapeutic activities, but it's got a lot of really interesting techniques. Why we almost didn't do this book chat and why our advisory committee like had to really think about whether we want to do this book chat. It's because, the nervous system is complicated. And given that the majority of our community has suffered relational trauma of one form or another, when we think about the nuances of an autonomic nervous system that is constantly in fight, flight, or freeze, related to past trauma and the post-traumatic or complex post-traumatic results of relational trauma. We thought we could talk about the science of the nervous system without getting into the therapeutic space. We don't want to be in the therapeutic space today, even though we do that in other programs. We wanted to not be in that space today because we don't have longitudinal relationships with most of you, and it can be not safe to like start dabbling in therapeutic things without having good follow-up and good safe relationships. So we're gonna stay. It's gonna be hard, but we're gonna stay in the classroom type of approach to understanding the autonomic nervous system. If you've missed our other January brain clubs, I'm going to do a recap of kind of like the basics of the nervous system. So, what we covered the first week of January is that the autonomic nervous system governs our internal body processes, these things that happen automatically. So, your heartbeat, your blood pressure, your digestion, and basically the autonomic nervous system's role is to store, release, and conserve energy and help us move safely through life. And what's really a lot of people like feel like their nervous system is controlling them, and they feel like it's like greatly mysterious and troublesome to people. And so that's because often we don't understand it. When we do understand our autonomic nervous system, we can learn how to work with it, and that's what this book is about. Hold on, I need the book to be open. All right. Okay. My mouse. What just happened? Here we go. Sorry. All right. So I'm going to read this book I'm not going to read the whole book to you. I'm going to read this quote from the book. So Deb Dana writes, a polyvagal informed understanding of our feelings, thoughts, and behaviors offers us a way to be with our experiences instead of being hijacked by them. And certainly, we hear from lots of people that that's their experience. They feel like their nervous system is hijacking their experience. So I'm gonna read the rest of this paragraph. When we're flooded by our emotions, we lose connection to regulation and lose the ability for reflection. From an anchor in safety and regulation, we can connect to our states and listen to our stories with the distance needed for reflection. So the idea of developing a scientific understanding of your nervous system is so that there can be this neutral way of discussing, exploring, understanding what goes on in everyday life. So what Deb Dana outlines in this book is that the autonomic nervous system has hold on, I'm gonna go. The autonomic nervous system has these three principles. This is what's outlined in this book. So hierarchy, and what the hierarchy means is that the states of the nervous system like proceed in a particular order. And we're going to look at a graphic on the next slide to better understand that. But that the autonomic nervous system has these three states. There is the ventral vagal. So vagal refers to the vagus nerve. So one branch of the vagus nerve is associated with safety and connection. There's the sympathetic nervous system. So the vagus nerve is associated with the parasympathetic nervous system. Sympathetic nervous system, that fight flight, that's kind of what it gets a rap for. But what is often kind of what's new in the polyvagal theory world is that it's not as simple as parasympathetic versus sympathetic. Instead, the vagus nerve has these two branches. One is safety connection, one is shutdown and collapse. And so we move through these three states in a predictable order. And that's what the hierarchy means, and predictable order based on how safe or threatened we feel. And we'll look at that. So she talks about neuroception. Neuroception is our threat detection system. Subconsciously, the nervous system is constantly scanning the environment for cues of danger or threat, or cues of safety. It's beneath our conscious awareness. It's not something we're aware of it just happening automatically, and really reacting to things in the external environment and the internal environment. And lastly, co-regulation. And we talk about this all the time at Brain Club, that human beings are wired for connection and rely on relationships to regulate their nervous system. There's a lot of mythology about regulation, like, oh, well, you're 5 years old, you should have self-regulation skills. Oh my gosh, we all need other nervous systems to regulate. And in fact, later we'll look at an excerpt from the book that talks about how failure to have safe co-regulating experiences in early life really does interfere with developing self-regulation skills. But even when you have self-regulation skills, we still need co-regulation. Co-regulation creates a sense of safety, and I don't really like the word resilience, but anyway, because it's buzzwordy and stuff, and it like makes it feel like it's a characteristic of an individual as opposed to really like we need community. So I like this quote. Let me flip to the page. I decided not to put a million words on the slide, but I think this might be one that I wanted to read more of. All right. So without so you can think of neuroception as autonomic intuition. Right? So many of us have been taught to override our intuition, often as young children, like, hey, I think this is bad. It's not bad. I think it's hot. It's not hot. I think it's cold. It's not cold. I think it's loud. It's not loud. Right. So we've been overriding our intuition and our sense of like appraising our own internal experience even. And so often that is an important thing for adults to then like have to unlearn and relearn, is reconnecting with intuition. So Deb Dana writes, without awareness, neuroception works in the background, serving our survival and shaping our days. It is when we bring perception to neuroception that we have access to perspective. By adding perception to the autonomic process of neuroception, we're no longer simply in the state. We are now able to be with it, observe it, reflect on the experience. I'm going to play a short video clip. This is Deb Dana talking about how the nervous system affects our daily life. Stop share. I really need to figure out my computer better. Here we go. All right, we're gonna rewind. I'm gonna reshare my screen. Yes, Liz, I agree. We all need continual co-regulation. Share sound. Here we go. Just gonna watch 3 minutes of this.
Hi, Deb.
Hello, how are you?
So you have spent a lot of your work paying attention to how the nervous system affects us, how we respond to situations. You've done that within the framework of therapy. Now let's pay attention to how this kind of learning could inspire us in the way we lead our lives.
Yes, it's a thank you for this invitation to try and translate my clinical language into everyday, ordinary, user-friendly language for what I've begun to start calling just curious human beings. Because in my trainings recently, I've had many people come who they just want to know about their nervous system, just want to kind of figure out what is this thing that's helping me navigate my life. So what I guess I would say in the beginning is that the nervous system is the foundation for all of us. It's where all of our experience begins. And so I think it's helpful for everyone to understand this system that's driving them in certain ways through their daily lives. It's not just something that we want to pay attention to in therapy. It's not a and actually in the therapy that I do, what I'm trying to do is help people become active operators of their own nervous systems. So I think that's really what I'm hoping, is that everybody will know enough about their own nervous system and how it works, so that they can then be able to befriend it and engage with it in new ways.
Yeah. And so maybe an entry point there is to say that the nervous system is going to be responding very differently when we're in a situation where we're safe versus when there is a sense of threat.
Yes, and that perception of safety then allows us to do what you and I are doing right now, to communicate, to connect, even though it's across a screen, to share this experience together and be in it together. And then a sense of danger moves us into a state of protection, and we either feel some anxiety, or we feel some anger. We want to get big and stand our ground and fight back, or we're ready to run away and get out of here. Or the other response that this brilliantly creative biology brings to us is this place of just giving up, of I don't care, give up, whatever sort of place. So yes, depending on how we're perceiving the world at any moment, our nervous system is going to bring one of those energies to life inside us. So, those are sort of the three building blocks of our nervous system, right? We've got that.
Oh my goodness, I actually transitioned back to slides without closing the window for the first time ever, I think. All right, so this is what the building blocks that she's alluding to are like. So there's the down, and it's really about the when we use the word hierarchy before, imagine there's like boxes, like they're blocks that are stacking. So dorsal vagal, that's that threat response where we are immobilized, shut down, collapsed. The only way to get from that, or dissociated, that's another way that dorsal vagal presents. The only way to get from that to ventral vagal, the safe, connected, engaging, that kind of vagal, you have to move through this one. That is what the principle of hierarchy means. So here we are in shutdown, collapse, dissociation. We have to move through mobilization, action taking. We have to move through fight and flight. Then we can move into the state of ventral vagal. So you can't go directly from dorsal vagal to ventral vagal. You have to move through this one. That was new information for me, and I found that really helpful to think about. And like, oh yeah, of course that makes sense. But in my own life now, having this lens of understanding, you're like, oh, I got it. Okay. As opposed to just, yeah, it's like random when I can get from here to here. It's not random. It has to move through here. So this is a slide that we shared with you the first week of January. These were some of the I thought, really awesome quotes that the author has that have just neutral language. My autonomic nervous system is activated. There's no judgment. There's no connotations. There's no, it just is. My autonomic nervous system's activated. I'm having a survival response or a protection response. That's what dorsal vagal and sympathetic drive are about. So survival response, having a survival response. My body is trying to send me a message. Just simply, once you get a little bit more self-awareness, and you can match how do you, and there's exercises in the book that kind of teach you how to figure out what state you're in. But just to name, if you developed that awareness, I am in the sympathetic activation state. I am in the dorsal vagal state. I'm in the ventral vagal state. Just neutral. Here I am. But maybe take some practice. I also really appreciate this quote. We need to remember that well-being is not defined by a nervous system that is always in regulation. A nervous system that brings qualities of well-being still dysregulates, but rather than remaining stuck in a survival response, it finds its way back to regulation through flexibility and resilience. So it's the idea of shifting from state to state and the more nuanced moves that happen even within one state. She refers to the idea of an autonomic journey, where there's react, something happens, you react to it, and then return to regulation. And then maybe later there can be some reflection around that. So it's just well-being is the flexibility, the ability to shift between states and recover. And so it's not about avoiding dysregulation. It's just learning how to navigate it. So I mentioned there are these experiential exercises, and so this one is probably the simplest one, so I wanted to share this one. There's for all of them though, there are these prompts to ask yourself as you're like exploring your autonomic nervous system, but just the idea of, here you are, where am I? What's happening in my environment? Who's around? What am I doing? What state has been activated? Just these, a lot of times we're just all caught up in doing all the things, but just like slowing down and just, where am I? What's around me? What am I doing? What messages is my nervous system sending me? So that's an example. But that's a chapter 1 exercise. So the exercises that go throughout the book get increasingly more nuanced. There's a chapter called Longing for Connection. Let me pull that one up. We come into the world wired for connection. With our first breath, we embark on a lifelong quest to feel safe in our bodies, in our environments, and in our relationships with others. We are born needing to be welcomed by another human being, and this essential need lasts for a lifetime. When basic survival needs are met, but there's no safe and predictable sense of connection to another person, without those connections, we have more difficulty regulating emotions, experience low self-esteem, and struggle to create lasting, healthy relationships. And while we may give up the active search for people to connect with, our nervous system never stops looking for, waiting for, and longing for connection. Until the day we die, we long for safe and reliable connections. Co-regulation is essential, first for survival and then for living a life of well-being. I'll read one more paragraph. We are wired for connection, wish for connection, and wait for connection. And yet, so often, it's been in our connections that we have felt not seen, not understood, not welcomed, and not safe. And so, the biological consequences of that is to develop these protection responses or survival responses in the sympathetic activation and dorsal vagal states. If you're interested in that topic as the idea of social connection and survival and social connection as medicine, Lizzie's going to drop a link to Brain Club from last year with our community advisory board member, Sarah Knutson, sharing a really powerful presentation on this topic. I'm just noting in the chat, Steve says, I appreciate the quote about flexibility and the ability to move between states and recover. It helps to paint a picture of part of what good autistic ADHD, et cetera, health might look like. I love that observation. Yes, exactly. Because I think there's also this mythology. I mean, it starts in childhood. You're like, don't cry, you shouldn't be crying, stop crying. It's like, actually, I'm crying because I'm regulating. This is how my body is trying to regulate and move through my states. And it's just the idea that you're always supposed to look calm or be calm or whatever. It's not based in science, but those were the messages that so many of us got. Yes, Bruno, I agree that Sarah's presentation was awesome. So actually related to that comment about kids getting the wrong message, without the early experiences of safely co-regulating, self-regulating strategies are created as a survival response. So that's the sympathetic activation and dorsal vagal responses. So we don't have safe co-regulation experiences. We're trying to self-regulate, but we don't they end up being strategies that are not they're not adaptive in terms of we don't learn the skills of coming back from them. We get into them and we stay stuck in them. We stay stuck in sympathetic activation. We're stuck in dorsal vagal. While we may look like we're doing well, our internal experience may be one of sympathetically driven fear. So, often we'll talk about with our patients that how someone's internal experience may very well not match their external experience, and I think that's really common. But mostly or more partially, what that is about is that it's not been safe to show on the outside what an internal experience is. Let me see if there's anything else from this page. Yeah, I think that's good. So Deb Dana distinguishes between social support and social connection. Social support comes from the people we can count on to show up and help us in concrete ways, and who make it possible for us to manage our daily living. Social connection, on the other hand, comes from the people in our life we know and who know us in deep ways. This is the person we call when we're feeling distressed and need someone to sit quietly with us without offering advice. The person who understands our need to rant sometimes and celebrates us when life is good. Socially connected relationships are filled with reciprocity. With social connection, we give and take, offer and receive. There's rhythm to the relationships. When we build a pattern of acting from a survival state, we suffer both physically and psychologically. We may be successful in the world, but we don't feel satisfied or find joy in our experiences. All right, I'm gonna wrap up with one more video. This one's really short.
When I look at these systems that are so big and overwhelming to me, and I don't know where to go, I come back here because this is where I can be responsible. And if I am in a place of biological regulation, I am putting that energy out into the world. And every being around me, every nervous system around me feels that. Right? There's a transmission that happens nervous system to nervous system, whether I'm talking as we are or whether I'm just moving through the world. And I think that is a powerful thing for us to recognize, that we're responsible for the autonomic information we're putting out into the world. And when we walk through the world from this place of regulation, we are letting every being around us know that we are safe and inviting them to feel that and come into connection. And I think, I joke, I say we change the world one nervous system at a time, but I do think this is how it begins. And we get enough, a critical mass of people who are feeling safe enough. And none of us feel this all the time. We all move into survival and find our way back to safety. That happens all the time, normal, expected experience, but not getting stuck in survival, coming back to safety. And when enough of us can do that, then I think the systems will begin to change, and we will have people in leadership positions and who can go in and say, here is how these systems can change.
On that note, we can open this up to Liz, that's funny. Open this up to discussion. I'd love to hear what has stood out to you. What are you taking away from this conversation, these excerpts, these videos? I see in the chat, Liz says social connections are filled with reciprocity. That feels important. Sarah says safety. So Sarah's quoting from page 66 in the book. Safety is essential for survival, but to our nervous systems, not being in danger. Hold on, it's jumping. There we go. But to our nervous system, not being in danger is not the same as being safe. I'm gonna say that again. Not being in danger is not the same as being safe. Holy cow. We humans are built with a negativity bias to help ensure our survival. Because of this, we're on the lookout for cues of danger and often miss the cues of safety. It's a really, I thank you for capturing that, Sarah. I found that really interesting. Like when I do trainings and I talk about neuroception, threat detection, I'm only talking about threat detection. I like completely never thought about the fact that neuroception would also detect cues of safety. That was not even on my radar at all. For exactly that point. negativity bias to help ensure our survival. And even individually versus like collectively or organizationally, I think we notice the threats because how could we not notice the threats, especially these days? And it's really important to like zoom out and recognize where are the cues of safety, from our community, from coming together, from radically showing up and connecting with other humans. CB says the nervous system never gives up seeking connection was a big one. Alvar says, was wondering if the literature or lived experience suggests any association or connection between dorsal vagal state and autistic catatonia. It's interesting, Alvar, when I first learned about dorsal vagal state, I had that same wondering. I think there's a lot that we don't know, but I think that there likely very much is a connection. I'm not familiar with that literature, but like in my mind, how could that not be connected? Because that's so the end extreme of that collapse. I don't know if anyone else is familiar with that literature. Monique says, the phrase survival response is my takeaway. I like it. Emily says, I love the concept of flexibility to move in and out of different states fluidly. Yeah. One of the exercises talked about dipping your toes in the other states through like practicing calling up memories or images. That one was really, really interesting. Yeah, Tracy, I don't know. I mean, sometimes what's really hard about life is that, you know, is there something that we can take almost like a building our own mosaic? So building a mosaic of information and resources without necessarily having someone really get the whole picture. And I think that's, that I think it's a good connection to even the webinar we did a couple of weeks ago, where, there can be someone who has expertise in a particular organ system of the body, but who is not necessarily connecting it to the rest of the medical conditions that autistic and ADHD people, for example, very commonly have. So I think it's just we're gonna take the value of the science and apply it to our take it and apply it for whatever you want to apply it to. It's a set of tools. Sierra says, this reminds me of a quote I wrote down this morning from, hold on, it's moving. The chat, it's moving. I can't see when it
I can read it, Mel.
Thank you. Thank you.
I was reading Mickey Kendall's book Hood Feminism this morning, and I wrote down this quote, and it reminds me of it. How do you feel? Do you want to be calm and quiet? Do you want to forgive in order to make everyone else comfortable? Or do you want to scream, to yell, to demand justice for the wrongs done? Anger gets the petitions out. It motivates marches. It gets people to the ballot. Anger is sometimes the only fuel left at the end of a long, horrible day, week, month, or generation.
Wow.
And I think that idea of just using anger as that tool to kind of move through that sympathetic response.
Yeah, because you have to. If you are in dorsal vagal shutdown, you have to move through that activation to reach that state of safety. Thanks for sharing, and thanks for reading your own quote. I appreciate our interdependence. Sarah says, in terms of removing shame, oh, you're quoting again, in terms of removing shame from our own judgment of the autonomic nervous system, along with the language you shared in your slide, I think it's helpful to look at the quote on page 66. The automatic nervous system doesn't make meaning or assign motivation. categories of appropriate or not appropriate, good and bad, don't apply. You're so good at plucking out the quotes, Sarah. Yes, I remember that part. Right. It just is. It's just a neutral description of what is happening biologically, physiologically. Just this is what's happening. As opposed to what ends up happening often is that when people become dysregulated and have displays of emotions, there is judgment from people who don't get it. And there's self-judgment and shame based on all of the negative experiences that someone has had during past experiences of not being co-regulated instead being shamed for having a nervous system that has involuntary automatic responses to the internal or external environment. And so, it's a lot of unlearning. It's a lot of unlearning. Like even I'll share this. The other day I was doing something really cognitively hard, and last year when I had to do this, it's our reporting thing I have to do. It's really hard for my brain, and I had this thought of like, hey, I did this year and I didn't cry. As though as though there were any problem with last year when I cried a lot over this task. So it's really like the internalized ableism of like, I should be calm. I am not calm. I am never calm. I am really rarely calm. Those of you who know me well probably would agree with that. But it's the ableism that is embedded everywhere of, what normal looks like and what mature looks like and all of it, when really that's not based in science. Michelle, I'm gonna wrap us up because it's 6:45. I'm sorry we don't have time to keep going. We've reached the end, but I appreciate all of you being here. And I hope to see you next week as we continue our conversations about, coming together in community and learning and unlearning together. So thank you, everyone. Have a good night. Bye.